It's shocking to some people that they might be leaving 5 or 6 figures on the table. If you're in the C-suite, you're probably leaving 6 figures on the table and you don't even know you're doing it. That's the crazy thing. Recruiters like me were expert at convincing you that the offer you just accepted is an amazing offer. We'll never tell you that you just left $140,000 on the table. We'll never tell you that. You'll never find out. But I know. That's a shock for most people.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Coachful Coaching Leadership Podcast. Today I'm here with John Gates. John Gates, founder of The Salary Coach.
Yeah, actually, my background is in corporate recruiting. So I've been a recruiter for a long, long time. I've been the negotiator on the other side of the table for many, many years. And now I'm kind of like the prosecutor who's become the defense attorney. I've switched to the other side, and I'm helping job seekers and candidates, executives in transition to negotiate their next pay package, keeping the risk to almost zero, which is
So while we were in the green room talking, in the proverbial green room, that was my first question. What sparked your focus on compensation and becoming a salary coach?
Interesting story. So I didn't always want to be a recruiter, and I kind of fell into recruiting. I think it's one of those careers that people don't aspire to. They just sort of find themselves in. And that's what happened to me after college. So I became a recruiter and started recruiting first for agencies and then on the corporate side. And there was one time when I lived in Oregon and I decided to interview with a company in Virginia. It was Capital One Financial. They had a really horrible selection process. It's designed to decline like 90% of people that interview. It's that hard.
Okay.
And so I went through that selection process after being laid off in Oregon. I work for a tech company in Oregon. And I'm going through the selection process. I'm sweating bullets. They're just beating me up left and right. All these questions, tests. You fail any part of it and you are not going to be offered the job. So after that whole day of grilling, I'm sitting in a conference room and in comes the recruiter who is recruiting me. And he says, John, I'm going to just lay it out for you straight here. We've interviewed over 20 people for this position that you're interviewing for, and only 2 have passed the process and the other guy just withdrew and you were the other one. So what's it going to take to get a yes out of you? I really want to close this out. And I found myself with leverage that I didn't understand how to use. And it was like, well, I could say almost anything and probably get it, but I don't want to mess it up. And so I said, all right, give me an extra $10,000 in salary, a signing bonus, and let's upgrade the relocation plan because I'm moving all the way across the country.
Mm-hmm.
If you can do those things, then I'll accept the job. And in 2 seconds, he said, it's done. I'll put it all in writing. And I was pretty pleased with myself. I thought I negotiated pretty well. And this was over 20 years ago. But I spent the next 3.5 years at Capital One wondering how much money I just left on the table.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't really understand that. And so I started tracking it. As a recruiter, I started tracking how much my candidates were leaving on the table. And I started reporting this to my boss to say, see, look at how great I am at negotiating on behalf of the company. I just saved you in 1 month's time my entire annual salary. And I started tracking this. And over time, I became the internal subject matter expert on how to negotiate pay on the other side. And I started teaching other recruiters how to do it. Eventually, I became the head of recruiting for multiple Fortune 500 companies. And so I've taught hundreds of recruiters how to do this. And during that time, though, started teaching friends and family how to negotiate the other side. And eventually I thought, well, I wonder if there's a business here. I wonder if I could teach strangers, people that I don't know, how to do this.
Yeah.
So, that's how I got into Salary Coach. I ran a little pilot program with 10 people that I didn't know. I just wanted to see if I could help them for free. And the average gain was in the $20,000 range. The minimum one was 9,000, and the top one was like 52 from the test group.
Wow.
And I've gone on since to refine the method, and it's just blown up from there. It's It's a pretty cool business to be in.
So this is an important topic because I think talking about money is so taboo.
Yeah.
Don't you find that?
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
talking about compensation, like how much do you make? I mean, there's more transparency in different states now, and like Colorado, New York State, a little more transparency in ranges. But why is it talking about money so hard for people?
That's a really good question. And I think it's because it's a measuring stick that people apply to their lives. In many cultures, that's true. For many people, that's true. People are afraid of being judged or so on if their pay is lower than somebody thinks. We assign value to money in a lot of different ways. And so that's, I think, why people are shy about talking about it. Even clients that I take in, new clients that are working with me as a coach, I have to ask them, tell me about your current pay package. How is it structured? We're going to be talking about that extensively. Some people are uncomfortable sharing that even with me.
Yeah. What do you see? What do you see is holding people back from, you know, basically like there's that taboo, right? There is
Mhm.
that sense of identity, measuring stick, success level based on that. But I guess when you look at folks who are doing it well,
Mhm.
what are they doing well when it comes to negotiating?
Okay, that's a good question. We might want to circle back just in case I get off the track here, but
It's
I want to
okay.
visit the thing that you asked about first, which is what is holding people back.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably relevant. The answer is fear more than anything. And people are afraid of different things, but mostly like if you're in a phone screen or somebody calls you and says, David, I found your LinkedIn profile. I think you're awesome. I have this great opportunity that I want to talk to you. And first, though, tell me about your pay expectation. And that question, people are remarkably unprepared to answer.
What would you say to that? Like that's probably the very first question every recruiter asks,
Yeah.
right? And I personally want to say none of your business,
Yeah.
right?
Well, I'll get into that in a second, but
Okay.
the reason why that brings anxiety is because they're afraid if they mess up the question, they won't move forward in the process. They will lose the chance to interview. And the same fear comes up at the offer stage. When somebody offers you a job, you don't want to negotiate. Why? Because you're afraid that they'll yank the job away from you or you'll mess up a relationship on the way in, or so you're afraid you'll lose
Yeah.
something big, and it pushes you into this corner. So you just asked a great question, though. What should people say when somebody calls you and asks you what your pay expectation is? And the language is shifting quite a bit now. 10 years ago, a recruiter would call you and they would say, they want to know what you're looking for money, but they would start off the conversation with how much are you making now? And more states in the United States, I'm not sure what it's like in Canada where you live, but in the United States, more and more states have passed laws to make that question illegal.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's so weird that it's illegal in some places and in others. Most recruiting functions today to comply with the law have just made a blanket statement to their teams, and they say you're just not allowed to ask that question anymore. You have to focus now on what they want, and pay history is out of bounds, so you can't do that. So how do you answer that question? Well, I've created something called the salary coach method, which is designed to reduce your risk in the process. And there are several ways not to answer that question, and I'll hit those first. So, a way not to answer that question is a vague non answer. So, you might say, well, it's too early in the process. Let's come back to it later. So, if you refuse to answer that question or you say, well, it's negotiable, you're still not answering the question. A screener's job is to decide if they should present you to the hiring team. And if there is a chance that that hiring team is going to fall in love with a candidate only to discover after investing a whole bunch of time that they can't close them at the end, who gets blamed for that when it happens? It's the screener. They point the finger to the screener, whether that's a recruiter or somebody else, and say, you didn't do your job. So if you don't answer that question as a candidate, the screener, nobody knows you yet. Nobody knows you exist yet, and it's easy for the screener just to push the next button to keep their own personal risk low, and that's what happens most of the time. So don't do that. The next mistake that people make is by answering it with a number. And this is what most people will do. When I'm recruiting and I say, what's your pay expectation? Usually people will say, well, I want something in the neighborhood of 150 or 250 or 350 or whatever the number is. And I like that because that number either fits in the number line of the range that I have or it does not. It's in or it's out. And if it's out, I can push the next button. And if it's in, you check the box and you can move forward. But let's say you're thinking, well, I'm feeling confident. I'm going to be very aggressive. And instead of 150, I'm going to say 190. And that's uncomfortably high for me, but I'm going to say that anyway. So here's why a number is a mistake. If you say 190 and they say, okay, I think we can make that work. Let's move forward. What if they could have offered you 225? You didn't know that that money was on the table and you just left it on the table. Because as soon as you give them a number, they're writing it on your resume and they're submitting it to the manager thinking, Dave's pay expectation is 190. We can get him at 190. Now they're thinking that's what the offer has to be. And you can never come off that number. It's really hard to do that moving forward. But the other risk is, what if 190 is too high and the top of their range is 175? Now you're out. So a number is a mistake. And so the correct answer here is to use a range of your own. So, and ideally you want your range to overlap their range some. Another little interesting tidbit is that the top of the range, if they give you the range either in writing or in person, the top of the range that they give you is probably not the real top of their range. And there's reasons for that. If you're a leader watching this, ask yourself, when was the last time you hired an employee to work for you and you offered them the very top of the range? You don't do that because it just creates problems down the road.
That's very interesting. When it comes to like numbers, one of the tactics someone has shared with me was to ask a question back as well. Like, what is, hey, what's your pay expectation, John? Well, John, you should ask, well, David.
I'll share a precise script if you want right now.
Yeah, sure.
This is the script that I teach my clients. So your audience gets this for free. So when they ask you the question, what's your pay expectation? This is a good technique. What you just suggested is a good technique, but here's the actual script. You say, I'm really glad you asked that question. I want to be very transparent with you about this. But first, can you tell me what your budget is for the role? And then you have to be quiet for about 8 seconds. And that silence becomes a little bit uncomfortable. And then they will fill the silence with their voice. They'll give you some information. And then if they give you a range in return, which is the most likely outcome, you can respond with your own range. So that works. That works really well most of the time. And if you're listening to this and next time you encounter this, you should try that and see how it works for you.
I'd be concerned for if a recruiter didn't give a range of some sort.
Sometimes that happens and it's legit. Like if it's a newly created position, you might hear, well, we're not sure. That's why I'm asking you. Like, I'm trying to talk to people who fit the role. We're trying to discover where the market is. You get some of that mealy mouth stuff sometimes. And if that happens, then
that's red flags for me right there. Right.
Yeah, your response should be a very wide range of your own. And, you're trying to find something that'll overlap.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So when you think about it then, so there's a few mistakes people do, and thank you for that tip on what you can do. What do you see people doing things when it comes to leaders who are negotiating their pay? What do you see people doing right?
Yeah, that is a great question. So I think the best thing that I saw going right is during the interview process, they're building value. So sometimes when you're interviewing, you're going to get asked a lot of questions. And people think that acing the interview is answering the questions well. But you have to be imagining what the interviewer sees as valuable in those answers. And people are very self-serving when they're interviewing somebody. A hiring manager wants to hire somebody who's going to make them look good, who's going to help them earn their bonus, who's going to not embarrass them and not cause problems and things like this, right? They'll never say that out loud, but they want to hire somebody who's going to help them earn their bonus and achieve their goals and do all these. And so the interview questions are designed to kind of help them assess whether that's true or not. But if during the interview process you can discover what the interviewer hopes to gain from a successful hire here, and like, what do you really hope, what is the successful outcome here, and oh, by the way, what are you afraid might happen if you pick the wrong person, and you ask the right questions and you try to understand the truth of what they really want, then you can start to sell against that. There was a guy I used to work with early on in my recruiting career. His name was Malcolm, and I was a 20 something green recruiter, and Malcolm was 50 something, very experienced guy. And he observed how I was talking to candidates.
Mm-hmm.
And what a lot of green recruiters do and a lot of green salespeople do is they'll get in front of a candidate that they want to convince, and they'll say, you're going to love this because the shift is great and the pay is great and the manager is great and the company is great and the benefits are great and the location is great, right? And you just kind of spray all this stuff out there. You flinging spaghetti noodles at the wall trying to see what might stick. And Malcolm came by and he said, John, I want you to listen to how I do this. And what Malcolm did is Malcolm would ask the candidate, like, what's really bothering you in your current job? If you could change one or two things, what would you change? And what he's trying to discover is what they wanted to buy. And for example, if he's talking to a guy who's saying, my reason for wanting to leave this place is I'm thinking about maybe it's going to be hard for me to be promoted because I work for the boss's son, the owner's son, and the owner's son is at the peak of his career. He's never moving, and he's 32 years old, and he's going to be in that job for the next 30 years until he inherits the company. And now Malcolm can go and say, well, I've got an opportunity here where the person that you'd report to is retiring in a couple of years and he has no successor. Would that be of interest to you? So this technique works in interviewing too. Like, you can spend time talking about all the things that make you great, or you could discover what the interviewer wants to buy and spend time selling that. And you'll be a lot more impactful because now you're speaking directly to what they want. And this is what separates people from one another in the interview pool. It's what's going to get you selected, but also if you can identify how the role contributes financially to the company, whether it's driving revenue, reducing expenses, or something like that. If they're going to offer you a higher pay package, like they want to do that, they want to land you, they're going to want to do what it takes to land you, they need to provide some justification. And so the people that do this well are already sort of feeding the justification for a great offer into the interview process. We should pay him more because he's going to bring in more revenue, or he's going to reduce the expenses, or she's going to drive this immense value for us. There's an approval process that happens with offers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so another common mistake too, I think, is that people assume that negotiation begins when an offer is made. And what I'm trying to explore here right now is that negotiation begins in the phone screen when they ask you about your expectation. It continues through the interview process. And so you want to do all these things to get the highest initial offer. And then the negotiation at the finish line is a tweak, not major surgery. Does that
Yeah,
help?
that helps a lot. I am curious, as you're talking, there's a lot more tools nowadays to help individuals in their negotiation. Namely like ChatGPT,
Hmm.
Gemini, Cloud, or like one of those AI agents that have become big over the past year and a bit, right?
Right.
How do you see compensation conversations evolving with these new technologies that
Hmm.
are available to candidates and
Yeah,
recruiters?
I think that's great. The thing to be concerned about with with AI guiding you in these things is that AI brings the common knowledge of the world into their recommendations. And what I've discovered, and one of the reasons I started Salary Coach to begin with, is I found that the common knowledge on this topic is bad to start. You've probably heard this advice. If somebody asks you, hey, are you going to negotiate? What they usually will advise you to do is research your value, know your worth, stand your ground, insist upon that. Those are very dangerous strategies in my experience as a recruiter. I've been on the receiving end of that style and that approach.
Yeah. Is it like an aggressive
Problem,
style, you mean?
yeah, it's an aggressive style. If there's one thing that's going to cost you the offer,
Yeah.
it's becoming a changing your personality
Yeah.
once you get the offer.
Yeah.
We'll do that to a high degree. You can't do that. And so there's an inherent risk in relying on AI in this realm. You can get some good advice and it might even give you some step-by-step stuff. I'm not saying that it's all bad. But the problem is if you don't know what you're doing in this environment, you don't know how to discern what's bad advice and good
Yeah.
advice.
Yeah. Some of the worst advice I've had was from the internet.
Yeah.
Some of the worst. Some of the best advice I got was just by messing it up, actually.
Yeah.
I'm not joking. Messing
You
it
do
up.
not have to change your personality and to negotiate well. You do not have to be aggressive. In fact, you probably shouldn't be. You're not going to get the best results going down that path.
Yeah. Yeah. It for sure. So I guess when you think about it then for all the leaders listening out there, what are a couple or a few mindset shifts they can begin to take on so that they can maximize their compensation?
Yeah, I think there are a couple. One is you have to become sensitive to leverage when you're building leverage, when you have it and when you don't. And so I think about leverage as a balance of power feeling. When you're first starting out, when you're an applicant or when you're early in the process, you have to realize and sense that you don't have a lot of leverage at this point to be demanding. Once somebody makes an offer to you, you have tremendous leverage at that point. The leverage and the balance of power shifts to you at that point. There might be other points where you can sense leverage shifting to you when you're interviewing and they stop asking you questions and they start selling you. That's a good indicator that you have leverage. And so I don't know if that's a mindset shift or not,
Well, it's an
but
awareness that you got to build, right?
yeah, it is a sensitivity that you have to build. And, if you have a coach, he can help you to recognize when that is happening based on your description of what's going on. So the other mindset shift too, this is really more knowledge than mindset, but it affects your confidence. We are in a soft job market right now that's beating people up. If you're in between right now and you're looking and you've never had a hard time finding a job and now you're having a hard time, it's like it beats up your confidence.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so you have to realize when this leverage shift starts to happen, when the balance of power starts to happen in a discussion, that means that the company is becoming a little concerned that they might lose you. Like you're all consumed with, I might lose this opportunity. And that pushes you into leaving money on the table all day, every day. You have to remember that the company experiences negative consequences if they can't secure you and they want you. So once they decide they want you, they have something maybe bigger to lose than you, or at least the same size. For them, if they can't get you, maybe they have to go back to the beginning. And if it takes them 60 or 90 days to fill a job,
Yeah.
what's the economic impact of a vacancy for another 60 or 90 days? What's the impact on the morale of the team? Everything like that. So that's a mindset shift that people need to adopt. Once they sense this leverage shifting, it should buoy your confidence that you can act a little bit differently without changing your personality, of course, but you're likely have leverage to get money that you would otherwise leave behind.
Right. Wonderful, John. Well, look, John, it's almost 30 minutes and it has flown by with me and you. I always end this podcast asking this same question to every guest. What's a question I haven't asked you, but I should have asked you?
Well, I think maybe how much money are people leaving on the table? I think that's a common question people ask. Most people don't know. My average client is gaining 10 to 20%. Sometimes it's a lot more, sometimes it's less. There are times when an offer comes and it's already maximized, and we discover that safely without putting the offer at risk.
Yeah.
But it could be as much as 10 or 20%, and sometimes more than that. It's shocking to some people that they might be leaving 5 or 6 figures on the table. If you're in the C-suite, you're probably leaving 6 figures on the table and you don't even know you're doing it. That's the crazy thing. Recruiters like me were expert at convincing you that the offer you just accepted is an amazing offer. We'll never tell you that you just left $140,000 on the table. We'll never tell you that. You'll never find out. But I know. That's a shock for most people.
Well, that's amazing, sir. Great stories. And I think I'd love to exchange a few more stories with you offline later. Well, John, thank you very much for joining me on the podcast today. If people need to reach out to you or need to look for you online, what's the best way?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn. John Gates with Salary Coach is an easy place to grab me or to follow me or to check in with me there. You can also email me directly at john@salary.coach. That's a pretty easy email address to do and a quick way to get my attention if you need to talk to me at all.
All right. Well, sir, thank you very much for joining me. And everyone, thank you for listening in.
Thanks. Bye. It was fun. I appreciate it.
That's a wrap on this episode of the Coachful Coaching Leadership Podcast. I'm David Fung, and my mission is to help leaders grow, lead with impact, and build thriving teams. If you found this valuable, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a fellow leader. Until next time, keep leading with purpose.